For decades, the story of Jeffrey Epstein has felt like this dark, complicated maze of power, money, and just horrific crimes. And right when you think the case is finally closed, a whole flood of new information has been forced into the light. So what's actually new in these millions of files? Let's break down what the documents themselves really tell us.
Right now, the Department of Justice has a truly monumental task on its hands. They are sifting through over 5.2 million files connected to this case. Just think about that number for a second. It's absolutely staggering, and it really shows you the sheer scale of an investigation that's been going on for decades. And that really gets to the heart of it, right? After all the headlines, all the speculation, what are we actually learning? With all this data, what new facts are being confirmed? And what mysteries are still out there? That's what we're going to get into, the essential takeaways from this massive document release. Okay, so here's our game plan. We're going to start with why these files are even being unsealed right now. Then we'll get back to the core crimes of Epstein and Ghislaine Maxwell. From there, we'll try to untangle that complicated network of power around them. We'll also dig into the questions that still hang over Epstein's death and wrap up with the ongoing fight for truth and accountability. So why is this story all over the news again? I mean, what's changed? Well, it all comes down to a really important piece of legislation that basically forced the government to open up its books on this whole affair. It's called the Epstein Files Transparency Act, a bipartisan law that was passed in 2025. And its mission was incredibly simple but powerful: force the Department of Justice to release every single unclassified piece of paper from its long investigation. And this law was specific. It didn't leave any wiggle room. It demanded everything: internal communications, all the stuff on Ghislaine Maxwell, the now infamous flight logs, the names of every person mentioned, and, so crucially, all the info related to the official investigation into how Epstein died in that jail cell. And the results of that law? It was an absolute avalanche of information. By early 2026, more than 3.5 million pages of documents hit the public domain, along with thousands of photos and videos. This is the raw material that journalists and investigators are digging through right now. Now, with all these documents out, it's really easy to get lost in the weeds, especially with all the famous names being thrown around. But before we go there, we have to ground ourselves in the foundation of this entire story: the monstrous crimes that Jeffrey Epstein and his partner Ghislaine Maxwell committed. And let's be crystal clear here. This is according to the Department of Justice itself. This wasn't just a series of isolated events. This was an organized, decades-long sex trafficking operation. And the scale is just horrifying. Investigators believe there were well over 1,000 victims. You know, the unsealed files, they give us this really chilling look into Epstein's own words. There is a moment where a witness recalled him saying, "You know what I like." And the interview notes clarify exactly what that meant: young, petite, underage. It's a direct, disturbing window right into his predatory mind. And then there's this quote, which just starkly illustrates Maxwell's role. The files document her actively recruiting girls for Epstein. A victim remembered Maxwell asking her to find someone else for him, which shows you how she didn't just participate. She managed the whole abusive system, even turning victims into recruiters themselves. All right, so this brings us to what is probably the most talked about and honestly the most confusing part of these files: that long list of powerful and famous names. And this is where it's absolutely essential to draw a very clear line between just being associated with someone and actually being involved in their crimes. And this is so important to understand. Just because a name shows up in a flight log or an address book, it does not automatically mean that person was involved in any crime. The documents mention hundreds of people, but the vast majority have not been accused of any wrongdoing by victims in these specific files. This table here really clarifies that distinction. You see figures like Bill Clinton and Donald Trump are mentioned, yeah, but in the context of being guests or acquaintances. There are no allegations of abuse by them from accusers in these documents. Prince Andrew's case, however, is very different. He was directly accused of sexual abuse by a minor in multiple legal filings, a case that he eventually settled. That context is absolutely key to understanding what these files do and don't say. But the questions don't just stop with Epstein's life. His death in a federal jail back in 2019 remains one of the most controversial parts of this whole saga. And believe me, these new files have only added more fuel to that fire. The official cause of death was ruled a suicide, and for years, that was the final word from the government. But a 2025 forensic analysis of the jail's surveillance footage, which is detailed in these new documents, found some serious inconsistencies that really challenge the completeness of that official story. Okay, so let's break down what they found. First, the government had claimed the video proved no one entered Epstein's cell block, but the new analysis showed the critical staircase was almost completely off camera. Second, remember that missing minute of footage? It was blamed on a system glitch for years. Turns out it wasn't missing at all in the raw FBI file. And finally, the analysis spotted an unidentified person passing through the area, something that was never mentioned in any of the official reports. Now, these discrepancies don't prove a conspiracy, but they absolutely reveal a stunning level of institutional failure and a real lack of transparency. So, after all that, where does this leave us today? Well, the release of these files isn't really an ending. You should think of it more like a catalyst for a brand new phase of legal and institutional reckoning that is still playing out right now. You know, when you look at the timeline, you really see what a long, drawn-out fight for justice this has been. From that shockingly lenient deal Epstein got back in 2008, to Maxwell's eventual conviction and sentencing, and now to the forced transparency of 2025, every single step has been a battle. And what's really happening now is that the accountability is spreading. It's not just about the individuals anymore. We're seeing major financial institutions like JP Chase and Deutsche Bank paying out hundreds of millions of dollars in settlements for their role in enabling Epstein's whole operation. Even the FBI is now being sued by victims who claim the agency failed to act on credible tips decades ago. So, the files are out, the data is public. But this isn't just about digging up the past. The real question now is, what happens next? Is this finally closing a very dark chapter? Or have we just opened the book on a much larger story about power, secrecy, and the incredibly long and difficult road to justice?